I can still say I haven't lost the popular vote. I can still say I've never lost the Virginia vote. But races are tough, and campaigning is tough, and you know it. You see it on TV, you see social media. It is a tough line of work, and campaigning is hard. And so we decided, Ann and I will come out right out of the gate on the first weekend. We're going to run a very grassroots-focused campaign because that's what works. I don't know who my opponent will be. I have 5 declared Republican opponents. They're all competing sort of to be President Trump's yes man. The Republican Party will choose my opponent in a primary in the second Tuesday in June. But whoever it is, I am going to work my tail off to show them that it's going to be extremely difficult to beat me. And it's not about me. I know who my most likely opponent is. My most likely opponent is somebody who is an anti-immigrant, bully, pro-Confederate guy. And it will offer, the election will offer a real clear choice about not who the candidates are, but who Virginia is. And I don't want the message to be a confused one about who Virginia is and who Virginia isn't. I want the message in the campaign to be very, very clear about who Virginia is. We're a state that isn't living in the rearview mirror. We're looking in the windshield. We're a state that's going forward. We're a state that's getting more progressive. We're getting more socially inclusive, economically dynamic, politically competitive, focused on education. This is who Virginia is. This is who we've worked for it to be with you in this room for the last 33 years, and we're hoping to run a race that will bear that out. And last thing I'll say is this. I know it has been a challenging time. I meet people all over the state and all over the country who are worried about things that are happening with the administration. I'm particularly worried as somebody with a kid in the military and who works on these national security committees about a president who undermines diplomacy at every turn, who backs out of deals, the Paris Accord, backing away from the Iran deal, who tweets out needlessly provocative juvenile things about a fairly unstable leader with a nuclear arsenal. Why would you do that? Who doesn't appoint key ambassadorial positions, thus suggesting that diplomacy isn't important? So there's a lot of things that many of us worry about. That's something that I personally worry about a lot, and there are other things too. But I'll tell you this, I'm excited by what I see happening in this country. When I see women's marches where the turnout is bigger than the inauguration. When I see judges standing up and saying you cannot do that Muslim travel ban and enjoining the President of the United States. When I see journalists, not all journalists, but many journalists doing really high quality work to explore challenges that the administration is getting us into. When I see governors saying, well, Mr. President, you can pull out of the Paris Climate Accord, but we're not pulling out. Yeah. We're staying in. 1787, 230 years ago, James Madison in Philadelphia, they put together a constitution after the first few years of the post-revolution hadn't been successful in this country. They needed a strong national government that they didn't have, and so they met in Philadelphia, but they had a worry. And their worry was, we don't want an executive to be able to run wild. Because they knew in 1787, they knew kings and emperors and monarchs and popes and sultans. They knew what executive power would do. There's nothing new under the sun. What we're seeing today is not really new. They were worried about the power of an executive unchecked, and so they put all these mechanisms in place. Congress, the courts, the press, the power of the people to peacefully assemble, to petition government for redress or grievances. And after 230 years, what I see, even in a challenging time, is I see those elements of the immune system coming to life in this country and showing that those checks and balances after 230 years still had a lot of vitality and power. And that makes me believe very strongly that this chapter we're living in is going to have an end that's going to be a positive chapter, and the ending is going to be that the institutions and opportunities for regular people to be involved at the end of the day are stronger than any individual, whether that individual be a president or a senator. And that's what a turnout like this also tells me, that people are taking very seriously the opportunities of small d democracy to stand up and say what is important to them and what should or should not happen. So thank you for being here today to help out. And what I'd love to do now is just open it up, take some questions, and then I'll start mingling around a visit. I'll come to the green shirt right here. And please say your name too if you ask a
John
question.
Swenson in Staunton.
Hey, John.
Disturbing article in the Post this morning about the exemption of wood pellet burning power plants in Virginia and the deforestation steadily thereof, because wood pellet burning is exempt from carbon cap and trade regs. So coal plants are converting to wood pellets, and big climate concerns. So any thoughts on that?
You know, I will say, one of the reasons I,
in Virginia,
one of the reasons you take questions is to get asked about an issue that you don't know enough about, so I need to learn about it. I have not read the Post this morning, so I need to.
didn't know a thing about it until this morning.
Yeah, so I'm
It's the fact that wood pellet burning is exempt from carbon cap
Right.
and trade regulations, and so.
So here is obviously, I'll give a more general answer. We have an administration that does not accept climate science. We have an EPA director and other key administration officials, including the president, who believe climate science is either a hoax or a Chinese invented, conspiracy. I'm not aware of a more anti-science administration than the one we're dealing with now. Virginians are pro-science people. 75% of Virginians understand that humans are affecting climate and we need to do something about it. You can get into some debates about what is to be done, but we don't debate the science in Virginia. There's an overwhelming consensus of the citizens that climate change is real, got to do something about it. I have fought very hard, the administration, as they've tried to weaken environmental regulations. I have voted against their efforts, although we haven't always been successful. They were able to repeal some Obama-era regulations right out of the gate, and even though I voted to keep the regulations in place, the vote came out and some regulations have been scrapped. They now don't have the power a year in to as easily retract regulations as they did right out of the gate. But we have to fight against bad appointees, and we have to fight against effort to weaken environmental regulations, and you can count on me to do that. Right here in the blue.
Hi, Senator, thank you for coming to Staunton. My name is Julie Schofield. I'm here from Staunton, Virginia.
Hey, Julie.
I want to thank you for being here. You've got my vote. I'm going to do everything in my power to get you reelected. There's no doubt about that in my mind. I want to also thank you for opposing that horrendous tax bill. I hope we can get to work at repealing it right away. I believe in more progressive taxation, not less progressive taxation. But the thing that I really want to talk to you today about is the checks and balances that are totally out of whack, and that's the influence of big corporate money in politics. And we here in the Valley are getting bullied upside and down by big corporate interests, whether it's Anthem Insurance Company trying to take away our health care at Augusta Health, or Dominion Power taking away our small farms. We are totally being injured and hurt by the influence of big corporate money at every single level of government. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about that, but I also want to say, we need your help. You're very influential here. We need your help to save a small family farm in Augusta County from being taken away and demolished by Dominion's Power wanting to put the pipeline through here. I know you know about that issue. We need your help at every level to try to bring that influence to get corporate money out.
So let me repeat it. Just since the questioners don't have mics, I just want to repeat and make sure everybody hears. So it was really two pieces. One was a little bit about the tax bill, and then second, the influence of money in politics, and with particular focus on, you use the examples of Anthem and use the examples of Dominion. So let me talk about quickly on tax and then talk about money in politics, because that is a tough one. So on the tax bill, I voted against the tax bill. It was a massive missed opportunity and really bad priorities. And the bottom line is, if you, and I used to know this on city council, if you have a bad process, you get a bad result. When tax reform was done in 1986, President Reagan was president, and he said, we're going to do it, but it's going to have to be bipartisan because it's too big and important. And so they had 10 months of hearings, and eventually it passed the Senate 97-3. Because they took the time to listen to everybody, and they were able to find a bipartisan support. This tax bill, they wrote it in secret. They wouldn't involve the committee chairs or the Democrats. They released it, and 41 days later it passed. 0 public hearings, 0 opportunity for Democrats to be involved. In the Senate, even though we're in a minority, Democrats represent significantly more Americans than Republicans do because of the size of our states. But they gave us 0 opportunity. And so, not surprisingly, a bill that was done in secret and rushed and partisan became a bill where the giveaway was to folks at the top. Small businesses and regular folks aren't benefited, bust the deficit. And an additional element of it is it really is bad for Virginia. There are states that kind of were winners and losers, and we ended up really being on the loser side. Things that have helped Staunton, like historic tax credits and new market tax credits, have helped Richmond too. They went into those programs and really screwed around with them, even though Virginia is one of the top users of both of those programs. So I voted against it. If we had done a meaningful process, even with the Republican majority where Democrats had the chance to offer amendments and there were hearings from people, we could have gotten this right, and instead we made a big mistake, and we're going to have to go in and dramatically change it as soon as Democrats have the vote to do so. Money in politics. Money in politics. This is a hard one because there is not a single campaign finance bill that you won't find Democrats overwhelmingly supporting. The Democrats supported McCain-Feingold, which was the last of the big bills to pass, and then the Supreme Court struck down big chunks of it. Democrats overwhelmingly, I know I do, support campaign finance. We cannot get, is a partisan statement and it is factually accurate, we cannot get even a single Republican co-sponsor for campaign finance reform that seems so modest. For example, there's a bill called the Disclose Act. No contribution, whether to a candidate or a committee, should be secret. It should all be disclosed. Yes. People have a right to know. We can't even get one Republican co-sponsor in the Senate or the House for something like that. We're not talking about limits. We're not talking about real campaign finance reform. All we're talking about is transparency, and thus far it has been a Democratic thing. So that puts those of us on the Democratic side in a tough position. We're advocating for reforms, but if reforms don't pass, do we unilaterally disarm? Do we tie our own hands while the other side can rake in secret money by the millions and the billions? It's a tough, tough call. But you're right. One person, one vote, which is constitutionally the law of the land, is undermined by the dollar effect of people being able to put in money, especially being able to put in money secretly. And so we're going to have to look for the opportunities, and it can be done at the state level too. Some state legislatures, one of the nice things about getting close in the House, and in 2019 the Virginia legislature could easily go Democratic in both houses, is we could start to do some things at the state level, but we'll keep pushing at the federal level too. Thank you. I'm going to come in the glasses right here.
Yes, I'm Luke Basham. I'm from Blythe.
Yeah, Luke, I know you.
Yeah. So the last time you spoke with me, you talked about how important it was to do things with Senator Warner for the state, for the Commonwealth. What have you been doing recently, or look to do in the future in that regard?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what do Warner and I do together? How do we work together? I will say this: of the 50 pairs of state senators, I can state, as a matter of fact, Warner and I are the closest. And the reason for that is we met in the spring of 1980. I didn't meet Ann until 1982. Mark didn't meet Lisa until 1985. We have known each other longer than we've known either of our spouses. I was his lieutenant governor. I'm his junior senator, as he always mentions. But the way we try to work, knowing each other so well, is we sort of divide the world committee-wise. So while I'm Armed Services and Foreign Relations help, he is Intel, he is Finance, he is Banking, and then we both serve together on the Budget Committee. So we try to share the committees so that we're not duplicating each other's work and cover things that matter to Virginia. And look, on all issues, we talk, what are you doing? And we don't vote the same on everything. There are some positions that we have that are different. But if we're in a different place, it's usually not by accident. It's usually we talk to each other, and I know where he is, he knows where I am. Okay, that's fine. But we're working on all kinds of things now. We have a bill right now that tries to, and this is a bill that we've worked on that's really more in his committee, that tries to make the regulations of credit unions and community banks a little more tailored to them rather than sort of the regulations you would want of some of the big guys, because we see massive consolidations in the banking industry and small banks having to sell out to the big guys, and we think consolidations in the banking industry are bad. We think having more financial institutions is better, not worse. And so we're trying to figure out a way to, we're both very strong supporters of Dodd-Frank, but we want to make sure that the regulation level is adjusted so it is not just push consolidations into larger and larger banks. But that's a good question. Right here in the baseball hat.
Yes. My name is Ryan Blosser. This is the first time I've ever been to one of these. It's a lot of people. I brought my family out today because right now we need a hope injection. I own that farm you're talking about, Dancing Star Farm, and
Yep.
I found out 3 days ago that Dominion is proposing to put a materials management yard, 34 acres uphill from my small farm as I'm trying to get organic certification. This farm, this yard, they're calling it, will sacrifice the safety of my family, my 4-year-old, my 12-year-old, my wife and I, and the viability of my small business. It's only 2 years old. I've been told at the county level, I'm powerless. I've never felt more powerless in my life. I know there's not a lot of stuff you can do on this local level to impact this. What are you prepared to do? What can you do on the federal level to make sure Dominion and their effort to put this pipeline through is not going to hurt and ruin families like myself?
Yeah, great, fantastic question, and it was sort of to give a full answer to your question too. I'm glad that you asked that. I want to point out Tyler works with me in the Senate, and so afterwards, if you will give him a card and trade information, because I may want to have a follow-up discussion about details, but let me talk about the pipeline. So, and what can we do at the federal level? Pipelines. So pipelines, right, the two pipelines, and what can we do about it at the federal level? I think you got to have a process like a FERC process that makes it an administrative agency with a sound process, and I'll come back to what is a sound process in a minute, that when there's a proposal about any pipeline, they do an assessment to determine A, is it necessary, and B, if it is, what is the right route. You have to have a good process, and we don't have a good process right now. FERC has a set of processes that are very old. I was very convinced by many of your calls and letters to my office, folks in the path of both the pipelines, that the process was not a fair one in terms of accepting public input. I was given a lot of examples of people going to public meetings and being blocked from speaking, or people speaking and then later looking at the transcripts that were prepared of their speeches and find that they were just completely filled with errors, as if it didn't really matter whether they got it right or not, which suggests then that the FERC commissioners are not really going to be looking at the public input. And so I've done a couple of things, and one just recently. First, I wrote a letter summarizing all of these errors in the process to FERC about both of these pipelines, and this is now a year or two ago, asking them to have a more respectful interaction with citizens about their views on these pipelines. Second, when they didn't make changes that I thought were sufficient, I've introduced legislation in the Senate, and it's actually been introduced in the House by a Republican, Morgan Griffith, and they're almost identical, not 100%, but they're very close, to reform the FERC process to give a lot more public input and make it really meaningful as they try to answer the two questions: is a project necessary? And second, what is the right route? That is a pending piece of legislation right now. But third, when the FERC rendered the decisions on the two pipelines in October, many organizations asked that the decisions be reheard. And I grappled over the holiday with people gave me the information about the rehearing petitions. And on Friday, I wrote a letter to FERC and I said, you need to rehear both of these pipeline applications. And I cited, I just want to be clear for the reason I cited, because everybody in this room probably is a master of the details about the particular, because we're probably talking about Atlantic Coast here. I just came from Blacksburg this morning. We were talking about Mountain Valley. You know more of the details than I do, but I noticed something about those FERC rulings. FERC is supposed to have 5 commissioners. And when they render a ruling, it's supposed to be 5 commissioners. Well, when they rendered the rulings on the Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley, they had 2 vacancies. And so they just had 3. Now, they're allowed to make a decision with 3. Legally, they can. But it was a 2-to-1 decision. There was a very strong dissent on both of the pipelines from one of the commissioners saying it shouldn't be done. There's not been a demonstrated need for these pipelines. Well, with 2 vacancies, that leaves the opportunity that if there was a full FERC commission, it could have been a 3-2 decision the other way. Now there is a full FERC. Now there's 2 more commissioners that have been put on. I think the public is entitled to a ruling on these applications, not from a divided partial commission, I think they're entitled to a ruling from the full commission. And now there is a full commission. So that's why I weighed in and said both of these projects need to be reheard. And so we can follow up particularly about are there aspects of your circumstance that would enable us to do more. But we've got legislation to approve the process, and I've weighed in and asked that these petitions for rehearing be accepted, and I think they need to be to give people some sense of confidence that this is being taken in all seriousness. And let me just say one last thing. We talk about pipeline shorthand, pipelines, but I look at this as a little more than just pipelines. The way I look at this is under what circumstances can a for-profit company forcibly take the land of a private individual to use it for a profit-making endeavor? You know, that's really because using eminent domain and taking people's property, that should always be a kind of a high threshold to get over. And it's not like this is eminent domain to build a road that the entire public can use. No, this is eminent domain to do a project that will be a profit-making project that may or may not benefit anybody around here. So that means that the threshold has got to be a high threshold. And I don't think FERC has approached it in that way. I don't think Congress should be the pipeline deciding agency or the siting agency. I think you've got to have engineers and all kinds of people with expertise we don't have. I don't think we should be in the business of saying yay or nay or this route or that route. But there needs to be a process that is technically astute and that includes public input, and I don't think we've had that.
Will
so
they be
far.
listened to?
Yeah. Please, sir, here, with the beard, and then I'm going to come right to the front. Yeah.
Bingo from Augusta County.
Mhm.
In 1973, the U.S. became the only country to have a for-profit healthcare system, the only industrialized country. That's left us with the most expensive healthcare system in the world, controlled by pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. The people that who may be losing their insurance may be better off not having it than being in the system. We're 43rd in life expectancy last month among industrial countries. Is there any reason to hope that there'll be anything done in Washington to address that?
Yeah. So it's really a question about healthcare, and you know, we have an unusual system because it is a profit-driven system. In most countries in the developed world, that's not the case. We spend more of our GDP on healthcare than any other country, about 19, coming up to 20%. Number two would be probably Switzerland at 11 or 12%. But we don't get great outcomes for our 20%. We have the best practitioners in the world, and we have the best institutions in the world, but we have a system that is organized around the treatment of illness rather than the promotion of health. And so we don't have good health outcomes. The payment model has been to pay for procedures rather than to pay for health, so we get a lot of procedures. And they're often very, very good, but we don't get health. And so what can we do to make the system better, to make it more affordable? Well, first, do no harm. Don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. The proposal to blow up the Affordable Care Act and take health insurance away from tens of millions of people, big mistake. Elements of the act, essential health benefits that people are entitled to, kids on family policies till 26, no discrimination in premiums between men and women, no discrimination against people for pre-existing conditions. These were all huge steps forward. And we now have one of the lowest uninsured rates in the history of this country. That's great, but there's so much more to do. And your question is, what are the prospects in a Congress that has been, we're pretty divided, and there's not much that we're more divided about than healthcare. What's the prospect for doing meaningful things going forward? On the Health Committee, I'm proud to come and tell you that although I'm in the minority, the Republican chair of my committee, Lamar Alexander, is somebody who you can really work with to find solutions. Lamar was a governor of Tennessee. He ran a Medicaid program. He was the president of the University of Tennessee, had a med school, hospital, physician practice groups. He's not an ideologue about healthcare. He's a practitioner who's had to do it. On my committee, I've got other governors. I've got former insurance commissioners. I've got 2 doctors on my committee. So the committee is one that has had a track record of being able to do some things that are bipartisan. We have a bill right now that has 25 sponsors, Democrats and Republicans, to try to stabilize the individual insurance market, so people who are trying to buy individually, through a group plan, but individually on the exchanges, we're going to try to bring premiums down. That's a short-term, stopgap, 2-year bill that we have. But the real thing we have to do is we got to get the big ideas on the table. So I have my Medicare X public option bill on the table. Bernie has a single payer bill on the table. Republicans have ideas. There's an idea to do a block grant. That's on the table. We got to get the ideas on the table, the big ideas, and we need to do what the Senate's supposed to do. Have months of hearings, bring in patients and hospitals and doctors and stakeholders to talk about any of the big ideas and what they like about this one and what they don't like about that one, and maybe there's a combined effort that we can do. But my chair, Lamar Alexander, and the lead Democrat, Patty Murray, who's very, very good, they're committed to doing that. We have to get over this hump and try to stabilize the individual insurance market. And I think that may be part of the budget deal we're doing in the next 2 weeks. We've got 4 really, really big issues on our shoulder. Budget, a permanent bill to protect dreamers, a long-term reauthorization of the Children's Health Insurance Program, and then an emergency relief package that treats victims of hurricanes equally, whether they live in Texas or Florida or Puerto Rico or USVI. An American is an American. So these are the 4 short-term issues that we're working on, but we are committed as a committee then to move to the next step on healthcare and what are the big ideas that we can tackle as we're going forward on that. Ma'am in green right here.
Hi, Ellen Werther. Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, bien, gracias.
I'm glad you mentioned CHIP. I'm trying to articulate a question here. I'm an
Yes.
ex-public school teacher, a master's in special ed, and I am very, very concerned about what's happening to public education in this country. We seem to be doing everything in our power to take money away from public education, take money away from special ed, special needs. I was at delegates, a town hall meeting for House of Delegates, Virginia House of Delegates, Steve Landis, and there's a teacher shortage. And I can speak from my own personal experience and the people I've talked to. We don't want to be in the public schools anymore. We're not supported. We are not supported. We are vilified. You can take as many of these as questions as you want. When I did some student teaching and some practicums, I worked with younger kids who hadn't eaten since the day before.
Yeah.
It is impossible to teach when you're trying to teach a child who hasn't eaten. And now with this CHIP thing, it's even worse because now they don't have the health care. They're scared. It's impossible to teach.
Let me take the 2.
Gracias.
Let me take CHIP and let me take federal support for education, because those are 2 big ones, and they're both in Health Committee in a month. So CHIP, everybody knows, it's the Children's Health Insurance Program. It was passed in 1997. It's one of the best examples of a bipartisan program there is. It's been bipartisan from the very beginning, but it runs out on the 19th. We have to reauthorize it, and we're debating a bill that would do a reauthorization for 3 to 5 years. This is as much a no-brainer as there is in politics because it's completely bipartisan, and the Senate has a CHIP reauthorization bill that came out of the Finance Committee in October unanimously. And if it were voted on the floor tomorrow, it would get at least 90 votes. So we've gone to Leader McConnell and said, look, there are things we disagree about that we have to negotiate about. But this is one we agree about. Can't we just reauthorize CHIP? Let's just go ahead and do it. McConnell has made the decision as part of the leverage discussion, well, if you want CHIP, then we want something from it, to not allow a straight up vote on CHIP, but to wrap it up with the other big issues that we're trying to grapple with between now and January 19. And look, I think it's wrong to use kids as a chip, right? It's wrong to use kids' health care as a bargaining tool. Because of all the issues we're grappling with right now, CHIP is the one that I'm actually the most confident that we'll resolve. But if you're a parent with a kid who's on CHIP, and you hear me say, well, I think we'll resolve it. Well, but you're getting a letter in the mail saying the CHIP program may expire in 60 days. Why are we needlessly inflicting people with a lot of anxiety? We should just be voting on CHIP and then spending our negotiating time on the areas where there's real disagreement. But I do have a strong confidence that we'll do a multi-year reauthorization CHIP education. We have an education secretary now that I deeply disagree with. Betsy. And I'll tell you why. And look, you can disagree with somebody. I vote for some people I disagree with sometimes, but the disagreements here are pretty fundamental. She, in response to my questions during her confirmation hearing, she did not demonstrate that she understood what the special education laws in the country were and that there's civil rights protections. She told me that it should be up to states to determine what level of education services they provide to kids with special needs. It's a federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And and I said to her, what if your kid with a disability being treated well, your remedy is you got to move to New York or something? I mean, come on. There's got to be a base level of protection for young people. And second, the other issue that's pretty important is she believes in diverting public dollars to support vouchers in private schools. Now, I'll say this, I went to a private high school. I think private schools are great, but I do not think you should take 1 penny out of funding for public education. I don't think you should. And so that battle is a battle that we're fighting right now. That's part of the budget battle. Again, I mentioned the big four. It's CHIP, it's DACA, it's hurricane emergency relief, and it is a budget battle. And the budget battle is over. Do they divert money away from public education? Do they, hollow out all the transportation accounts, to fund the tax relief bill that they just did? I mean, that's what the budget battle's about. I do think we will come out on the education funding piece of the battle, even though the Trump administration is making proposals that would be very harmful. I think we have enough Republican allies on education funding that I think the education funding piece of it is going to come out pretty well. But we're going to have to keep battle on this one every day. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to just come down and now mingle, because there's people all over the room, including people in the hall, who may want to say a word. But thank you so much for coming. Stand and rock.